Thank you everyone for joining us today for the Path to Zero Emission Maritime Fuel for Shippers webinar. We're delighted to have a distinguished panel of experts who will guide us through the essential aspects of zero emission maritime fuels and their impact on the shipping industry. My name is Olga and I will be your moderator for today's event. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping details to ensure a smooth and engaging webinar experience. We encourage you to participate actively by submitting questions via the chat feature, and we'll include questions from the audience throughout the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording, along with the presentation slides, will be shared with all registered participants after the session. If you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat function to notify the support team, and they will assist you promptly. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to an engaging and informative discussion. In this webinar, we will cover a comprehensive agenda, starting with an overview of maritime greenhouse gas emissions and the challenges of decarbonization. We'll explore Zero-Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, ZEMBA, its framework and strategic intent, followed by an exciting review of the winning bid from ZEMBA's first tender, detailing the carrier, vessel, fuel, route, and timing for zero-emission shipping starting in 2025. Lastly, we will hear from ZEMBA founding member and beneficial cargo owner Patagonia on the strategic benefits of zero-emission fuels for shippers. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers and panelists. We have Ingrid Irigoyen, Senior Director of Ocean and Climate at Aspen Institute and the President and CEO of ZEMBA. Ingrid is a renowned expert in sustainable maritime practices and climate policy. Her work at the Aspen Institute focuses on developing strategies to reduce carbon emissions in the maritime sector and promote environmental stewardship. Her extensive experience and deep insights, Ingrid will provide valuable perspective on the transition to zero-emission fuels and the role of shippers in this critical journey. Next, we're honored to have Anne Schutte-Palmer, the Director of Sustainability at Green Worldwide, and has been at the forefront of integrating sustainable practices within global shipping operations. Her role involves spearheading initiatives that align with environmental regulations and drive innovation in green technologies. Anne will share her expertise on the practical aspects of enabling zero-emission shipping and the challenges and opportunities faced by shippers. Finally, we are thrilled to have two beneficial cargo owner panelists, Kim Drenner and Tony Ferguson from Patagonia, who will share their perspectives on strategic benefits of zero-emission fuels for shippers and how Patagonia is leading by example in adopting sustainable maritime practices. We will begin with Anne. Anne, please start us off.
Thanks, Olga. All right, everybody, just want to start us off at the very beginning. So 90% of cargo is shipped across the ocean, and maritime freight is essential to our economy. At the same time, the shipping industry has a huge impact on the climate. Maritime shipping emits 1 billion tons of greenhouse gases annually. That's as much as some entire countries. These greenhouse gases are part of the emission inventories for both the carriers and their customers, cargo owners and freight forwarders. For the carriers, these are Scope 1 emissions. And for the cargo owners and their freight forwarders, they're Scope 3 emissions. This means carriers, cargo owners, and freight forwarders are all interested in decarbonizing the maritime sector. The main barrier to success here is the high projected cost of zero-emission fuels. To reduce costs, we need a robust competitive marketplace and sufficient demand and supply to achieve scale. However, no individual cargo owner or freight forwarder can meaningfully stimulate the market for zero-emission solutions on their own. So how can we work together? The Zero-Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, ZEMBA, is creating a concrete solution for climate-leading cargo owners to reduce their Scope 3 transport emissions, accelerate the deployment of greener solutions, and harness economies of scale. We're thrilled to have ZEMBA's CEO, Ingrid Irigoyen, here with us today to tell us about ZEMBA's process for getting the best deal on zero-emission shipping. Turning it over to Ingrid.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne. And I want to start with a quick apology to our Green Worldwide team. I was using the wrong password to get in this morning, so I hope I didn't give anyone a mild heart attack, but great to be here. Really, really appreciate the leadership of Green Worldwide and of course of Patagonia as well. Both of you have been tremendous members and champions for really being at the forefront of decarbonizing what is a really hard to abate sector and a really important sector, one that is absolutely critical to so many businesses around the world. So this slide is an important one because it helps us understand the urgency and also that we still have an opportunity. And it's so important in these climate spaces to find those mechanisms that allow us to catch up on lost time and put ourselves in a position across a variety of sectors to be successful and to meet our global objectives for reducing greenhouse gases. And of course, for individual companies, you have your own goals and targets that you want to achieve. So what you're looking at here is a classic S-curve analysis for new technology adoption. In this case, we're talking specifically about alternative maritime fuels. And if we want to be at zero emissions by 2050, then the key milestone for 2030 is around 5% market penetration of those new fuel alternatives, which means we need to be at about 1% by next year. Unfortunately, today we are pretty close to zero, with the exception of some biodiesel that is currently being blended into some heavy fuel oil. We are very supportive when freight buyers want to support those kind of solutions, particularly the most advanced biodiesel options. The challenge with, excuse me, bio oils is that they face really serious scalability limitations. And that's just basic science, that we have a very limited supply of the most sustainable waste-based bio-oil feedstocks. So we need to, of course, maximize the opportunity presented by that specific fuel type, but it's absolutely urgent that we also begin to incorporate these other fuels that can get us to significant scale. And many experts in this space talk specifically about the green hydrogen-based fuels in particular. These new e-fuels, which I'll use that shorthand going forward, can not only reach significant scale, they can also benefit from economies of scale and cost reduction over time, which of course for businesses is tremendously important. So if we couple voluntary action to kickstart adoption of those new fuels right away with appropriate policy support, which by the way is another arena where we work if you're interested in policy, then we can achieve our goals. And I would add also that if we act now, we reduce the risk of a rushed transition with all of the cost and disruption implications that such a rush would entail. So the cost of delayed action, as we call it in a lot of these spaces, is quite real when it comes to maritime. And the good news is that as customers of this industry, you can actually take action now to enable you to start achieving your ambitious climate targets as soon as next year. And we have created a mechanism to do that. And it allows you to have real measurable impact in this notoriously hard to abate sector and do that in a very forward-looking and future-proofing way. So let's go to the next slide and I will tell you all about that mechanism. So the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance is essentially a collaboration of freight buyers, both cargo owners and freight forwarders, who are seeking to come together to kickstart this new market for scalable zero emission fuels. And we know from many conversations with many freight buyers that you want to do that ideally without disrupting your logistics. And you want to invest now in solutions that can help you manage cost in the future. So again, avoiding that higher cost of delayed action. It's also true that companies, and I would say humans in general, for that matter, tend to prefer safety in numbers. And as we push into these new fuel alternatives, the organizations that we work with know that they're in good company. We've got 30 existing members. We are constantly recruiting new corporate freight buyers to join us. And you can also have the confidence to know that as a result of working with us at the Aspen Institute, we are teaming up with some of the finest experts in the world on maritime decarbonization, on the legal structures for how to run this project, tapping into those policy opportunities and influencing in the policy space as policymakers see climate leading companies, job creators making moves in this space. And so through that work, you're basically able to take advantage of the free capacity that we provide in trying to solve this problem. So how does it work? Essentially, we aggregate, at the beginning of every cycle, we aggregate a nominated batch of volume for decarbonized freight across our members. So we would provide you with tools and modeling outputs that help each member decide how much do they want to decarbonize in different years. And then we run the tender process on behalf of our members. Our members are protected from the nitty-gritty details, in part to spare your bandwidth and capacity, and also as best practice in competition law, it's best to keep our members at a distance until we have completed the negotiations. So essentially, we do all the hard work, and then we emerge after that process with a winning deal, and that winning deal is based on the highest emissions reduction we can get, the best price we were able to negotiate, and a variety of other important factors, including, more broadly, environmental sustainability, the deployability of the fuel, safety, a variety of other factors that we know are important for companies. Once that's finished, we present that winning deal to our members, and only once you have all of the commercial details do you actually make a commitment. So it's actually fairly zero risk in that sense. And how on earth does that work without messing with your logistics, you may be asking yourself. So let's go to the next slide. So after we emerge with the best deal possible, we use essentially a book and claim approach. And this is a tool that is getting a lot of attention lately because Science Based Targets Initiative is currently in the process of developing guidance for how to allow book and claim approaches to count toward companies' Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions targets. And that's an effort that we're very involved in. So if you haven't heard the term book and claim before, you will soon. And I'll tell you all about it right now. And the reason that we take this approach, first of all, is that it would be virtually impossible to take all of our members and all of Green Worldwide's clients and align what your logistical needs are in space and time, and the carriers that you simply need to work with to get your boxes from point A to point B, to try and align that with the availability of these new fuels, the most technologically appropriate way to deploy those fuels in space and time across so many different companies. And that actually has been one of the major barriers to progress in the maritime space. So through a book and claim approach, we are able to essentially decouple the emissions reduction from that actual freight moved. And that means, so if we take this schematic here, if we have two ships sailing, the green ship is sailing with the green fuel and the black ship is sailing with the conventional fossil fuel. If cargo owner A has their boxes on the green ship, but they are not willing to pay a premium, they are not willing to pay essentially for those environmental attributes, then they don't get those environmental attributes. And they essentially have the same greenhouse gas entry into their inventory as they would as if that ship had sailed on conventional fuel. But if you're cargo owner B and you're a ZEMBA member, you are actually able to then purchase those environmental attributes from the green ship, even though your actual box was on ship B using conventional fuel, because you just simply needed to get your goods to market and you needed to get them there on time. And so this allows us to harness and really maximize that willingness to make an investment from freight buyers from all over the world and channel that into the best decarbonization deal on planet Earth. And of course, in order to make all of that credible and appropriate and verifiable, we have to do a lot of work to ask a lot of questions of the fuel producer. We have a lot of paper trail that we're looking for, and really have a strong chain of custody approach to understand that the fuel that was used in ship A is in fact the fuel that we expected it to be. It was used in certain quantities, and what were the actual emissions that resulted from that deployment. So it's a fairly rigorous process that is already being used in aviation. The best analogy would be for renewable energy credits. and different terminologies used in different places. We talk about RECs in the US mostly, but that is essentially what we're talking about here. It's the exact same kind of system with some additional safeguards given the complexity of the maritime space. But that is essentially how we make this as easy for you as possible. You do your freight contracting the way you need to do your freight contracting to get your boxes to where they need to go. And on the side, we help you find that best green deal possible, and then you're able to be sold the environmental attributes of that best deal possible, and count that toward your inventories and toward your targets. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about fuel. And I don't expect that everyone on the line today is a maritime fuels expert, so I will try to keep this fairly simple. But I'll talk about what we did in our first round tender, which we just completed in April and are now have completed all of the contracting for, or nearly all. Which fuels were in and out of scope for that first round. And this is something that we'll probably stick with for our second round as well, just for awareness. Essentially, when it came to fuels like fossil LNG, our finding was that on a life cycle basis, which is the most important way to consider and evaluate these fuels, the emissions reduction was not significant enough, and that there was too much uncertainty around methane slip and too much methane slip to allow fossil LNG to be considered in scope for us. Biodiesel fuels, again, some of the most advanced, can get up into those higher percentages of emission reduction, and many of them, have been, robustly certified, but we have that scalability problem. And so most observers believe that those fuels will actually sharply go up in price as we approach 2030, and many company targets are going to be coming to the fore, and many other sectors of the global economy will need to be tapping into those bio oils. So serious scalability and potential cost increase in the years ahead. So what do we want to be shifting to? As better transitions, we have fuels like waste-based biomethane and biomethanol. Those use biogas, which, while not a totally perfect solution, not infinitely scalable, is using things like landfill, the fumes off of landfills, if you will, and some of the waste gases coming off of livestock operations to capture those and actually use those in what are essentially LNG ships. In the case of biomethanol, that requires different ship engines, but similar production pathway in terms of coming from biogas. So more scalable, not infinitely scalable. And then we get to really what our goal here is, which is to get to those e-fuels. So e-fuels produced with clean energy, and minimizing the use of biogenic feedstocks wherever possible. Some of these fuel types will still need some biogenic carbon until direct air capture matures, but significantly more scalable and very much on that long-term pathway to zero. So that's really what we're driving toward, and that's why we call it the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, because these are the fuels that we really would like to see in the market as quickly as possible. In the meantime, biomethane and biomethanol options, when those are very carefully assured and verified and certified, can be certainly a pathway to those e-fuels. For our first round tender, we set a 90% emissions reduction threshold on a life cycle basis. And we were able to achieve that, and I'll tell you about the winning deal for our first round in just a moment. So that 90% threshold on a life cycle basis is what we used for the first round, and we may stick with that for the second round. We also took into account a wide variety of other factors to emerge with the first deal. For our second deal, we're likely to be looking at these e-fuels again, and really seeking to get those deployed in the market as quickly as possible. Next slide. So our first round deal. So this slide really helps you understand the splash that we were able to make in this sector with our first round tender. Anytime you have a new idea, an innovative approach to sustainability, it can be met with some skepticism in the beginning, particularly when we're trying to do something that is complex and the good news is that for our first round tender, we actually had tremendous interest. We had 19 prospective bidders who expressed interest. They altogether represented about 82% of the global container market, so significant interest. That 90% threshold was a real reach goal for many of the shipping lines in this first round. So we ended up getting 5 qualifying bids, shortlisted 3, and chose 1 winning bid. And I'll tell you all about that on the next slide. So the winner of our first round was a German headquartered container carrier called Hapag-Lloyd. The vessel that they will be operating on is a very large, very new LNG ship. And the years of deployment for the current contract term were 2025 and 2026. So we're going to see very quick deployment. The route of deployment, which again, in a book and claim scenario, doesn't actually matter to you, but for your awareness, that route of deployment is from Rotterdam to Singapore and back. It's a round trip. Those are a lot of nautical miles. For those of you who are freight people, you'll say, does it take that long to get from Rotterdam to Singapore? Well, that's because there are multiple stops along the way as well. And the fuel that we were able to secure for this deal is a waste-based biomethane that is coming out of Europe, ISCC certified, and the expected emissions reduction that we get from that is around a 93-94% reduction versus low sulfur heavy fuel oil, which is the standard fuel type. You are dying to know what our members paid for that, and I cannot reveal that to you. So that's something that you get if you're a member, or if you work with Green Worldwide to access this deal through them, which I strongly recommend.
Before we do the questionnaire, the question, I just want to add on one piece to what Ingrid said, and then the question's a little bit of a transition. But I just want to emphasize that ZEMBA requires regulatory additionality to all other maritime-specific regulatory obligations. So, like, that's a mouthful. What does that mean? It means that cargo owners' payments for zero-emission fuels aren't subsidizing any of Hapag-Lloyd's compliance obligations under the forthcoming Fuel EU maritime regulations or any other maritime fuel blending mandates. So instead, the cargo owner payments are going entirely to the use of zero-emission fuel above and beyond anything that Hapag-Lloyd is already required to use. Hapag-Lloyd commits to this. Yeah. Yes. They're committing to this in the contracts that they sign with ZEMBA members. And any future winner of a ZEMBA tender will also need to agree to this. So the cargo owner payments are going specifically to more new zero-emission fuel. And I will turn it over to Olga for that question that came in.
Yeah, and this one's for Ingrid. So this is a question from the audience. If a ship buys B and C credits, could it fractionalize where it recognizes the Scope 1 portion and sells the Scope 3 to its cargo owners?
So that's right. So one company's Scope 1 is another company's Scope 3. And the guidance on the use of book and claim for Scope 3 claims is under development right now. And in fact, SBTI just released a lengthy material this morning that we're still carefully reviewing. But essentially, as a carrier is booking that emissions reduction, what they would be booking for our purposes is that Scope 3 reduction. And it is then the cargo owner, the freight buyer, that then claims that reduction by virtue of having had a contract with that party to cover the premium. And it's really important to emphasize that, actually, and I may not have in my earlier slide, that really what we emerge with is a deal just for that cost difference, the cost difference between the green fuel and the dirty fuel. So your regular freight rates, that is something that your freight procurement teams always negotiate on their own separately. We don't get involved in that, which is always a great relief to the freight buyers teams within our companies. It's really just that premium. And absolutely, the regulatory additionality is tremendously important to us and is something that is part of the contract. So hopefully that answers that question.
Great. No, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you both for your pieces just now. So corporate climate leadership requires action. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Green Worldwide Shipping and Patagonia are two of the companies already taking that action. Now I'd like to welcome the head of environmental impact, Kim Drenner, and the lead of customs trade and logistics, Tony Ferguson from Patagonia, who will tell us about why their company is not just participating ZEMBA, but helped found the organization. Welcome, Kim and Tony, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Olga.
Awesome. So our first question, let's start with Kim, and Tony, please jump in here to answer as well. But why did Patagonia choose to participate in ZEMBA, and why now?
Well, why not? At Patagonia, we have kind of this view of, we're in business to save our home planet. And so we are quite small as a brand, and we can't decarbonize the maritime sector alone. And when you look at our footprint, like our transportation emissions aren't so significant. It's not where the bulk of our emissions are, but this is, like Ingrid mentioned earlier, a very hard to abate sector. And when the opportunity was kind of presented to us to join this initiative to kind of bring a bunch of cargo owners together to demonstrate this large demand signal for these green fuels, it was a no-brainer for us at Patagonia to participate. So that was kind of the impetus for kind of what pulled us into kind of the COZED movement as a signatory brand, and then working closely with Ingrid and her team at Aspen and the other signatory members to help think about kind of what we could do jointly to demonstrate that demand, and looking at kind of like a buyers association just made a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Kim, that between the Aspen Institute, COZEB, and ZEMBA, they made it really easy for us to participate and be involved. And we have limited resources, whether it's on the sustainability side or on the logistics side. So it was a really great hand-holding and sort of the way they were able to sort of move things forward, the organization and the structure and the support was invaluable for us.
That's great. And how will ZEMBA contribute, to these SBTI goals that were mentioned earlier? And Kim, if you could define what Science-Based Targets SBTI initiative is for those that are not familiar with it, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we formally joined SBTI a number of years ago and went through the full kind of target setting validation process. So, years ago, we had a carbon neutrality goal, and I think what our intention always was to reduce absolute emissions, but SBTI really helped us kind of define exactly what that emissions reduction should be in line with a 1.5 degree kind of warming scenario. And so it made a lot of sense for us to align with the most available science, the best available science, and having our targets be very specific around what we were aiming to achieve. So we went through the formal validation process. We submitted our targets, and really, again, we're looking at our scope 3 emissions. That's where the bulk of our impact really lies. And for an apparel manufacturer, it's really within our textile supply chain, but transportation makes up still a significant portion. And that's why we need solutions to address those emissions. So we have work we're doing on our textile side of things, but how are we going to actually achieve a 55% absolute reduction in our entire scope 3 by 2030, again, including the transportation component. And then we are looking at 2040 as our long-term science-based target goal of about 90% absolute emissions reduction across our entire value chain, and then ultimately achieving net zero. So again, what are those levers that are there to decarbonize in shipping? And being a small cargo owner with not a lot of leverage, it was really crucial as to coalesce around kind of this larger industry initiative to send a demand signal to have an ability to actually decarbonize that portion of our footprint.
And that's such a very powerful, statement, especially around scope 3. It is the hardest to decarbonize with the least amount of guidance, up until recently. So that's definitely probably added to the timeliness. Tony, would you agree?
Definitely. Kim spends a lot more time in tier 3 in the materials side of the business, but from our side, it's important. I mean, obviously, one way to reduce your carbon footprint is to ship less air, and that's something of big focus for us in terms of reducing that. So then that points all of our efforts towards the ocean side and sort of the maritime piece. And so being involved with this program makes a lot of sense for us in terms of reducing that. And you don't have to jump in like 100%. Like we are not committed. We haven't committed all of our volume, and I don't know that any of the other participants have, but you can participate at whatever level you're comfortable with and wet your feet and sort of see that grow incrementally and see where it goes. And, the 2-year contract period makes a lot of sense in the hopes that there will be sort of better improvements towards zero emission fuels by the time this RFP expires. And so that we're hopeful and excited to see where it's going to lead. And we're excited to see more brands and companies participating.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. And I could, jump in and just add something on the Science-Based Targets Initiative. If anyone wants to learn more about what's happening in that space, you can just look up environmental attribute certificates. And you'll see there's a lot of discussion happening in climate spaces right now about those kind of insetting approaches. And it's really important to distinguish out of sector offsetting. So for example, planting trees to try and capture that carbon, where there is a lot of debate, and those kind of offsets really need to be rigorous and credible. And currently, those can't count toward your Scope 3 emissions. Book and claim approaches for in-sector investments are something that have been sort of a gray area up until, still, but starting to clarify. And it sort of depended on who was doing the audit for your sustainability report, whether they would allow that to sort of count toward that particular portion of your inventory. And this has been, I think, difficult for companies that want to do the right thing. They want to future-proof their businesses. They want to help move this sector forward and other hard-to-abate sectors as well. But now as we work, and there are a variety of great collaborative efforts. I'm on the board of the Center for Green Market Activation. They're actually pioneering a lot of these book and claim approaches and these new, the new carbon accounting guidance. They're providing a lot of really helpful information to bodies like SBTI about how to make these environmental attribute certificates as close to the ground, as close to the impact, and as confidence building as absolutely possible, so that companies that make investments in projects like ZEMBA can benefit from the full credit, if you will, for those emissions reductions. And so we're building all of this simultaneously. We're partnering with others on the first maritime book and claim system. We're providing that input to the carbon accounting world to ensure that these kind of approaches are able to really sort of maximize that benefit for the companies that are voluntarily participating. And then, of course, running these tenders. And also the policy arena is shifting around us constantly. And so we really take on that work of monitoring all of that, influencing all of that, so that what we can emerge with is a system that allows any company in the world that wants to reduce their maritime emissions a very simple and easy way to invest that money, get a certificate that's going to count, and really have confidence that what you resulted in was not some questionable emissions reduction, but a real fuel switch on a real ship. And that is where we're going to have the most impact. So we're going to be standing by for final guidance from SBTI in the coming months, and we'll be very, engaged with helping people think through the right way to do this. But by the time these 2025 initial certificates from our ZEMBA Tender 1 are issued, all of this will have been resolved. So the good news is that you can get those certificates from Green Worldwide next year. And, as we keep an eye on SBTI, hopefully we'll feel really confident in and clear on how that guidance can be applied in your real world settings. So.
Thank you. And it is very essential that they get the credit for these initiatives. I know that's something that we hear on our side as well. So it's a big part of the conversation. How will this investment impact Patagonia's brand and your story and what you're trying to accomplish over there? Kim, maybe you first.
Yeah. So our approach has never been just to do this from like a marketing standpoint. Again, the uniqueness of kind of the founders of the company really taking our business and trying to come up with solutions to the environmental crisis. It's really around that, and being able to kind of invest a dollar directly into this transition to these green fuels. I feel like that is really powerful. Not touching with like the cost of the freight at all, but like really having a way to contract separately just for the action you're hoping to see on the ground. And then again, bringing all these other companies along to demonstrate this larger demand to have a much more significant impact for the entire sector is really what's going to drive, I think, more of this larger impact for Patagonia that we want to see. Like if we're really only focusing on our portion of our transportation emissions, we're not achieving anything. And so that is, I think, one of the like areas around kind of our brand and story. We feel like the success of ZEMBA is really going to just highlight again, like what we're here to do to try and come up with these really tangible solutions to solve for the environmental crisis.
Yeah. And I would add to that from a logistics perspective, as a department, we feel pretty disconnected oftentimes from the sustainability side of the business. And so having an opportunity to participate in a program like this, where we're actually making inroads and making improvements on behalf of the company, it's a good connection, and it's a nice bridge between sort of my world and Kim's world. So it's for us, it's important. We work with, we're small, like Kim said, we work with NVOs, so we don't even have direct contracts with any carriers. And that's one of the nice things about this too, is that we can do it because of the way this program's set up. We don't have to have those direct contracts. We can work right with an NVO, like a Green Worldwide. Not that we don't work with Green Worldwide. I'll put that as a comment, but you could if you wanted to buy certificates.
So actually, that's a great point, because I want to piggyback and ask a question in here, probably towards Ingrid, that someone asked in the chat right to that comment. So is ZEMBA the counterparty and aggregator for these contracts, or are these still individual contracts that each corporate will have to coordinate between the fuel provider and the shipper and the BCO?
Yes, great question. And this was one of the really early design questions that we asked companies like Patagonia who were helping us sort of craft this approach. And we heard pretty clearly that they, companies, cargo owners, freight forwarders, they want to have control over their contracting. So what we do is we act almost as a broker. So we set up the deal, and we do all that hard work, including we offer model contract language for exactly how to ensure that you are protected contractually and you get what you pay for at the end. And of course, also to protect the carrier, because we're talking about pioneering new fuels and things can change midstream. And so we've negotiated for our first round a really solid contract that most of our members used as written, and yet they had the flexibility in some cases. They wanted to change a few provisions, some of those core fundamentals of the kind of fuel and the price you're going to pay for the fuel switch and all of that. Those were obviously less negotiable because that's a package. But there are a variety of different approaches that our companies wanted to take to tweaking that contract, in some cases, including some of those provisions in an existing freight contract, and that was totally fine, and that was able to be done bilaterally. We were always on standby to help if there was some confusion or if we needed to be involved, but have found that we really didn't need to be. It was pretty clear, and we learned a lot of things from this first round, and we'll make it, even more smooth and easier with every subsequent round that we do. So hopefully that helps. So we are not the counterparty. We are not involved in that final contracting. We just do everything we can to make it easy for you.
But I will say, you don't have to sign with ZEMBA. You can still get the benefits of this through the member parties. So through Green, through another freight forwarding party, you can still have access to it without making that full commitment, to that allocation yet.
Yeah, and that would actually be a great way to dip your toes, because Green and ZEMBA have already gone through this now for this first round process. So it should make your ability to access that round one deal even smoother and easier. It's going to get so easy that we're just going to start handing them out at the grocery store. But somebody's...
And I actually have one more thing to add before we go into the next question, because this is still timely, piggybacking off of the last piece of that, right? Will there be a marketplace to hold these credits, right? And where is the mechanism for where these credits will be devised?
So I think the answer to that question is really around the book and claim registry that we're working with partners to develop. So we're working with RMI, which was involved in the development of the first sustainable aviation fuel registry. It's with RMI and with the Maersk McKinney Moller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, which is a Danish not-for-profit, and with a lot of deep technical expertise in these areas. And we're working with them. A number of our cargo owners are actually, right now, they've they've graciously accepted our invitation to be testing that system and making sure that it works well for cargo owners. But the registry is really intended to be that transparent place where we ensure that every unit of emissions reduction is appropriately accounted for and assigned to the appropriate party who paid that premium. So that's how we prevent inappropriate double counting. And we seek to get as much transparency as we can to build the confidence that companies need to make these kind of investments. And so it's about maximizing that transparency, but of course, without revealing sensitive commercial details. So that system is actually being built right now. And for companies that are interested in getting involved, we'd love to hear from you if you want to be more involved in those spaces. And if you're interested in sustainable aviation fuel, that's, you can go ahead and get involved in that as well. Our partners over at the Center for Green Market Activation are now actually approaching their third round procurement using a very similar approach. They're very close partners of ours. And in fact, I'll throw it out there that they're also now building buyers alliances for other hard to abate sectors like cement, aluminum, steel, chemicals. So that's all in formation. And so this is actually, with this SBTI guidance, in the works, I think we're going to see a tremendous surge of interest in these environmental attribute certificates for hard to abate sectors. And I just want all of our listeners to know that there are lots of ways that you can get engaged in harnessing that, catching that wave, and getting in touch with any of us who are here is going to be a great way to do that.
Thank you very much for that answer. That's wonderful. And speaking of, so on our next question for Patagonia is going to be, what are the markers of success for you guys that are going to show that ZEMBA has worked and that are going to let you participate in that next round tender?
You want me to go first, Kim?
Yeah, you go for it.
Yeah.
I'm more in the physical world, so I'm looking for infrastructure, like fuel infrastructure in place. I'm looking for a carrier uptake on zero emission fuels and sort of the count, sort of how the builds are going in terms of, those are like the tangible, the additional lines or lanes or strings that we're able to put in place for green fuels. Like those are like indicators for me that we're heading in the right direction. And I think that the membership and association with ZEMBA sort of is pointing and leading towards that. That demand aggregation, I think, is a powerful tool for these. And it enables, whether you're an infrastructure, somebody with the fuel infrastructure, to make that investment, that financial commitment, knowing that there's backing behind it and that you've got customers and you've got an income stream that's guaranteed at some level. So that's what I would see. I think Kim is probably more on the sustainability and certificate side, so I'll let her speak to that. But that's what I would want to see in the physical world.
Yeah, I echo that. I want to see that too. But yeah, I think emissions reduced, I think will be really powerful. And I think just also around this mechanism of this kind of book and claim, showing that this works in this sector. I think that'll be, really exciting to see. That will be one of the successes of this, all the hard work that Ingrid and her team are doing behind the scenes working across all these different groups with the GHG accounting folks, like, advocating for the use of these market-based mechanisms and why they're so important. That will be one of the big successes, showing that ZEMBA was successful.
Great.
Wonderful.
And I would add to that as well, seeing movement among suppliers. And I don't think it's a total coincidence that as we emerged on the scene and we're showing that the customers of the maritime industry were getting organized, and getting organized to help kickstart a leap of courage for the industry. This does involve risk by the maritime sector. We're asking we're asking the investors behind the fuel producers to take a leap forward. And in an arena where there's regulatory uncertainty and there's demand uncertainty and the macroeconomy is, constantly in flux, we need to do everything we can to build confidence, to help de-risk some of these projects all the way back across the value chain. And that really is one of our fundamental theories of change. So we've seen a lot of positive movement, and that is as a result of lots of people's work, not just ours. But I think when we see that we get a number of good qualifying bids, when we see a surge of investment in these arenas, lots of new ships on the water that can use these new fuels, it'll be just another indicator that we're having not only the concrete impact by, units of fuel being switched for greener fuel, but we're also having the impact on the human mind, which in the end drives all of these decisions that are made across this maritime value chain. And for those of you who may be listening who are fuel producers or ship owners, just know that we really also want to help make the business case for you on moving forward. And, carriers should be preparing to bid, and fuel producers should partner with carriers, because we're going to need that good fuel to be behind those bids from the carriers. So there's a role for everyone. A lot of ports are involved in as well. And so as we see that also for us is a major measure of success.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that we're coming up towards the top of the hour, close to the end of this session, but before we finish, I also want Ingrid to go in and touch base on how ZEMBA is going to kickstart a positive feedback loop for this zero emission shipping.
Great. Yes. So our friends over at Green did a great job improving this graphic that we had sort of patched together with limited skill. But yeah, this is really sort of our theory of change in a nutshell. And it is essentially that if we can make advanced market commitments, so commit to offtake these environmental attributes, then we will catalyze a number of changes from a number of essential actors. So we'll see increased supplier investment, so ship owners investing in dual fuel vessels. We'll see operators, in the case that they're not also the ship owner, then entering into long-term lease arrangements for those dual fuel vessels. We'll see ports invest in the necessary infrastructure for storing and bunkering those fuels. And we'll see fuel producers be able to get their projects to final investment decision and ramp up production. So on the supplier side, we build that confidence. Policymakers are also watching, and because these green fuels will be more expensive than fossil fuels in the early years, we really do need policymaker support. And what we need from them is to create an even playing field for the climate leaders. Climate leaders are often willing to be champions and willing to do the right thing and make these investments, but it's also a lot to ask of companies to do on a voluntary basis. And so it's really important that policy is there to help close that cost gap, help support the new fuels and technologies, which are not just going to be good for the environment, they're also going to be better for energy security and supply chain resilience, for the health of local communities. There are a wide range of environmental, social, and economic benefits of this transition. Policymakers are often inspired by private sector leadership. And so by being a part of this community, you show that leadership, and policymakers take those cues and say, we'd like to help on this journey. So that's an important aspect as well. And then, of course, as we get these new solutions to scale, we'll start to see cost reductions. And all of that creates that positive feedback loop. As we see costs come down with that good kickstarting and that good policy support, then we'll see increased demand, which creates more investor confidence, and the cycle continues. And, so far, I think we're seeing that bear out. The fuel type, the biomethane that we're getting out of this first round tender, I haven't seen any other deals announced for that particular fuel type. This is really pushing forward, maximizing emissions reductions, and we're really proud of that. And we're really proud now to then take the next step into those e-fuels. And start to reduce those biogenic feedstocks. So as we move along the fuel ambition trajectory as well, this cycle becomes more and more important, because we're talking about pushing those technological boundaries further and further, which is absolutely what we all need to reach all of these goals.
And I know we can't talk about price because that's part of the conversation, but somebody did put a question in asking about how many credits are going to be available. So I wonder if we can touch on that.
That is an excellent question. And I would suggest that your next step should be to reach out to the Green Worldwide team and see what they've got. Because they'll have some in hand and be eager to work with clients to help you gain access. In the event that there aren't enough credits for 25 and 26, we certainly are more than happy to work with the winning carrier to see if there's the possibility of ramping up. And I think that's very much on the table. And we would be happy to provide more demand. And then, as we look ahead to 27 and we look to those e-fuels, those fuels that we really need to see for that long-term scalability, we're pretty excited about that second tender. And if you want to get geared up for 27, then get in touch either with the Green Worldwide team or with us directly, and we can actually create all the credits that we're all looking for right out of the gate. But the good news is, for this first round deal, it's certainly by no means too late, and you're inquiring at just the right time. So,
Anne, do you want to touch base on that as well?
Yeah, to just situate that in the overall context. So when Ingrid talked about the winning tender and talked about that 1.18 billion TEU nautical miles, that is the amount of credits that ZEMBA and Hapag-Lloyd and the ZEMBA members contracted and committed to produce. So Hapag-Lloyd will produce those credits as they sail that dual fuel vessel on the waste-based biomethane. And then the credits transfer to the ZEMBA members, most of whom are cargo owners themselves, and so we'll be retiring those Scope 3 credits on their inventories. As a freight forwarder, we occupy another space in the value chain, and so the credits that we have access to can also go to our cargo owner customers. We both retire those credits. So we have access to our portion of that 1.18 billion TEU nautical miles as a result of this first tender.
Thank you very much. If we could go to the last slide. I know we actually are perfectly timed, coming up on the top of the hour, so I'm very proud of us for not going over. So let's finish up here and discuss some next steps. I do want to thank our incredible group of panelists and speakers, Kim, Tony, Ingrid, Ann. Wonderful information for the whole group here. Thank you very much for being with us. And the next steps for us, everyone else on this call as we head into 2025, first is to please share this information provided here today along with the recording. It will be sent out once it's available to any relevant parties in your organization. It is essential to get this in front of the right people at the right time and have it incorporated into a strategy. Next, as you begin forecasting and budgeting for 2025, heading into the tail end of the year, please remember to include zero-emission maritime shipping in your strategy. A lot of you are hearing about it for the first time right now. Ingrid mentioned this is the first type of fuel available of its kind on the market, so very important to get involved and consider this as part of the strategy that you have in 2025 and going forward. And finally, to get started and save your spot in that allocation, please connect with us here at Green Worldwide Shipping to reserve your 2025 ZEMBA shipping allocation through us. We're happy to help you. For more information on ZEMBA, please visit the ZEMBA website or reach out to sustainability@greenworldwide.com. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance on this webinar, and we will send a recording of this with the summary slides after the event. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, everyone. This has been really great. Much appreciate your leadership and partnership throughout this process.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.